Hitters, we are going to do a review and breakdown of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man episodes 3, 4, and 5, starting now. Welcome back to the Nerd Social. I am Colin. So, Marvel just dropped their third, fourth, and fifth episodes on Disney Plus of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. And the title of episode 3 is Secret Identity Crisis. It is written by Jeff Trammell and directed by Stu Livingston. Episode 4 is titled Hitting the Big Time and is written by Charlie Neuner and directed by Liza Singer. And episode 5 is The Unicorn Unleashed. It is written by Jeff Trammell and directed by Stu Livingston. So my spoiler-free thoughts on episodes 3, 4, and 5 is that it is jam-packed and full of reveals and surprises as well. Some of the references are related to the 616 universe, which I'll get to in the breakdown. There are a lot of new alliances that are formed at the end of these episodes. As I mentioned in the first 2 episodes, there's like this tag at the end, which gets the audience to want more for each episode. I'm glad actually that they have 3 episodes that drop. Next week, I think they're going to have another 3 episodes as well. So it really lends itself very well to have a continuation of the story. There's also new toys to play with. You will see a lot of those gadgets and things like that in these 3 episodes as I break it down later on. There's also some new characters that are revealed. And despite all of the newness that's happened in episodes 3, 4, and 5, the storyline is pretty easy to follow and it makes a lot of sense. There's nothing out of left field. It is just straight up good storytelling overall. In terms of rating, I would give episode 3 a 9 out of 10, which is a movie marathon. I think the storytelling, especially at the beginning of the episode, is top notch and it's well worth watching it again. The rating for episode 4 I give is a 10 out of 10, which is a theater rental. A lot of the story within this episode, there's a ton there for us to break down, and it's done brilliantly, especially the references that are made are really good, and you should look forward to it when you watch it. And finally, the rating for episode 5 is an 8, which is a road trip. I think that overall, it's still very good storytelling. It's focuses on one particular character, but it's not as compelling as the other 2 episodes in the sense of the story, but it's still pretty good. So that's why it's a lower rating than the other 2 episodes. So those are my spoiler-free thoughts. If you like to hear what I have to say about Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man and other content we put out there, please like, share, and subscribe for more. We really appreciate your support on all of our social media platforms. Before we go into the spoiler breakdown of these 3 episodes, I want to address a little bit about the elephant that's in the room, which is regarding voice actor Hudson Thames' comments, which was in a Collider article promoting Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. There were some comments he made that were very controversial, and these were the quotes from the Collider article. A little bit of background about Hudson Thames. He was also the voice of Peter Parker / Spider-Man in the What If Marvel series on Disney Plus. So he said in this article regarding his thoughts about Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, I thought it was awesome. My biggest fear was that it was going to be annoying and woke, and it wasn't. And I was like, yes, this is great. It's so well written. Like, it feels real. I'm the oldest of 5 boys, so I feel like I know what's happening in their lives and in high school, and it felt like it was doing that justice. So he got a lot of backlash for saying that, especially about the woke nature of the show. And I think that there's definitely some validity as to why he deserves a lot of this backlash. Because first of all, did he not watch the show beforehand? Because honestly, the whole show is pretty woke. You have a lot of race bending and gender bending of certain characters. If he defines that as not woke, that's fine. But obviously, it is pretty woke. And just the subject matter and all of the characters being bent, it's different. Even the showrunner, Jeff Trammell, said that it was going to be a very different take about Spider-Man than in previous iterations. Now, maybe he doesn't know what the word woke means. I'm not really sure, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. I think that even if he was feigning ignorance, it's not a very smart comment to make given how politically charged the world is right now. I think that finally it's a very teachable moment in that there are people out there that are either slow to see progress or don't want things to change. Now, I don't know where his headspace is and why he said what he said. I think that he has walked back on the comments as well. But should we judge them for not seeing progress or don't want anything to change? I don't really have a good answer as to whether or not we should judge people like that. What I can say is that people need to have an open mind to progress and learn. I think that's something that's missing for far too long because we have let fear and anger be the driving force to divide all of us in this country and also overall in the world. I think it's time to really let those things go and move forward together, especially in this time period. And as I mentioned in V for Vendetta, it might take mass collective action for this to happen. But I think that sometimes we really need to think about it in a way that it's the learning experience and a teachable moment rather than just judging, oh, shame on you for saying this or shame on you for saying that. So those are my thoughts about what happened with Hudson Thames. So without further ado, I'm going to get into spoiler territory here. Please watch episodes 3, 4, and 5, enjoy it, and then come back to listen to the breakdown that I have. So spoilers ahead. Okay. So we start off with Nico in a foster home. I applaud the writers of the show to make it seem as though it's not a big deal because it is a very significant thing that happens. Sometimes we tend to accentuate issues of not being part of a traditional family. They did a very good job of acknowledging that, but also not just putting a microscope on it to make it feel that it was very uncomfortable. We ended the second episode with Norman Osborn figuring out that Peter was Spider-Man, and we find out that he was able to obtain this footage in the private hallway. No one else was able to see except for Norman. So that's where he was able to figure out who Peter is. Peter finds out he saved Harry back in episode 1 from the bullies here. They end up meeting together, and it was a shock to Peter that he was saving Norman Osborn's son. So it was good to see that Peter really had no regard whether or not he was famous or not. He was just someone that was in need and needed to be saved at that point. Norman then gets into his own detective story to finding out who Spider-Man is and that the internship was a front to get all these bright minds together, but also to figure out who is Spider-Man because he ended up deducting that Spider-Man was young and that Spider-Man was in high school. So he created the internship in order to make sure that he was able to find out who Spider-Man was. There was also a point where Norman was trying to get Spider-Man to upgrade his suit, and this is just some of the inspirations that he's had over the past 3 episodes where he's trying to get that classic Spider-Man look. We haven't seen that yet. I don't know when we're going to see it in this season, but hopefully we get to see this very soon because there's a foreshadowing of that. But we do get to see a suit later on at the end of episode 4, which I'll talk about when we get to it. We see also that this part of the Spider-Man Peter Parker story is not unlike any others where they are struggling economically. Aunt May is seen here trying to sell off a lot of Ben's stuff from his past and trying to let go. It does seem that May is reluctant to do that because of the fact that there's a lot of sentimental value, but they are in desperate situations because Peter then sees that there's a lot of past due bills. So in his mind, he's trying to figure out, maybe I should not quit the internship because there was an earlier scene where he wanted to quit the internship and didn't really feel comfortable working with Norman Osborn. However, economically, it might be at a desperate point where he might have to stay on the internship just to get the bills paid. A lot of young people have that type of situation where they have to do some things that they don't want to do, but they do it because they need to feed their families. We see at this point that there's a backstory to Lonnie's family as well. Lonnie's family lives in Harlem, and he has a younger brother, Andre. His mom is figuring out that Andre has been hanging out with the wrong crowd and had joined a gang. And so Lonnie has to intervene to try to figure out what that is all about. And we see that Lonnie confronted the boss of the gang. The gang is named the 110th Street Gang. And so in order to get Andre out of trouble, Lonnie decided to join a gang instead, to his brother's chagrin, pretty much. And this is where Lonnie's character really flipped, because we saw in the first 2 episodes, he was a jock, but he was really friendly to Peter. He had an opportunity to go to professional football. And now, because he has to protect his younger brother, he has to join the gang and go down through that type of life that he probably doesn't want. But as we get through each of the episodes, we find out he becomes more and more comfortable in that life moving forward. Near the end of the 3rd episode, Norman pretty much becomes Peter's Alfred. There was some instructions that Norman was given through the computer back at Oscorp as Peter was web-slinging all over town to try to fight crime. And the big action scene in this episode was this fight that Peter had with Maria and James, who were robbing a jewelry store with some cybernetic enhancements. And with this cybernetic enhancements, there was a symbol that was on it that was very similar to the equipment that Butane had in the previous episode. He was able to apprehend Maria and James. Toward the end of episode 3, we find out that Norman becomes a part of Peter's team, and as well, Lonnie then becomes a part of Donovan's gang. We then start episode 4 off with Dr. Whitman. He's very much like the corporate boss, driving the workers to the ground in the name of results and progress. It's a very different approach to Peter's mentor, Dr. Connors, who is much more softer to getting results, whereas Whitman is definitely the tough love guy. Now, of course, in terms of teaching styles, there's definitely going to be teachers that's going to push you, like Dr. Whitman, and there's going to be ones that are much more empathetic, like Dr. Connors. So it's very interesting to see that dynamic play out between the two. Peter then meets Harry for the first time, and then Harry also figures out that he was Spider-Man. Now, this scene is from Captain America Civil War, so these are the references that I was talking about in the spoiler-free part where the Sokovia Accords were mentioned. Peter got really concerned to whether or not he needs to register as a superhero, but Norman said that he will handle that situation, so you don't have to worry about the Sokovia Accords right now. If people remember, the Sokovia Accords were signed by members of the United Nations where superheroes are being registered, and there's a governing body that tells the Avengers where to go, where not to go in case of danger. And this is the start of the Civil War between Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, where they're butting heads to see whether or not the government should be in control of superheroes or not. And it's also based on the classic Civil War comic book storyline. We then get to have Norman and Peter figuring out what type of suits are the most appropriate, because it seems as though the homemade suit that you saw in the first 2 episodes was not going to be the one that's going to be there for the entire season. So there's this suit that is brought up here in episode 4. I'll talk more about the suit later on, but there was like other suits. That was like a Batman type suit that scared a little kid. There was another suit that looked like a moth. So they were going through all the different types of suits. Norman explained that there's a secret projects division that work around the clock to manufacture these suits for Peter. This, of course, is a scene from Spider-Man Homecoming. It was one of the post-credit scenes. Big Donovan, who is the leader of the 110th Street Gang, sent Lonnie to a rival gang territory and almost got killed. And he explained about Mac Gargan, who is aka Scorpion. And so there was a war between the 110th Street Gang and the Scorpions. Osborn is trying very hard to keep innovating because he sees the Avengers are a threat. And so Osborn is trying very hard to push Peter to a point where he may not like being pushed, but it's for the betterment of him personally, but also maybe of humanity, so that there could be a counterweight to the Avengers, because he thinks that the Avengers do have too much power, and it might be that he is working with the government to try to counteract that threat from the Avengers. There was some references to the Battle of New York. This is why this scene was here on a newspaper. There was also some references to Age of Ultron with the Hulk's attack on Johannesburg. And also there was a reference to the Lagos bombing and the killing of King T'Chaka from Captain America Civil War. So Peter's new suit is the white suit that looks like the future Foundation suit from Fantastic Four, but it also has some red and blue highlights that are there on the side. At the very end of episode 4, the forever symbol that was on Butane and also Maria and James were the work of Doc Ock. And so they're really trying to build out Spidey's rogues gallery here. We see Norman Osborn, now we see Doc Ock. We briefly got to see Matt Gargan. And so there's a lot of these characters that are getting built up as we go along. They're not really force-feeding you with the villains all at once. They're really slowly introducing him as a tag at the end of each episode. We start off with episode 5 with Doc Ock being reduced to a distributor of enhanced tech. He feels very frustrated that he does not measure up to Stark, Banner, or Osborn. He used to work for Norman Osborn, but he quit because they had a butting of heads and egos. And so there's really a lot of tension between the two, and we haven't really figured out what Doc Ock's intentions are, but it seems as though it has to tie in with Norman Osborn in a way. Norman then offers Harry to be a part of Team Spider-Man, as he has found out that Peter is Spider-Man. And Harry in this iteration is a social media celebrity, and on their version of Instagram. And he also gets homeschooled, so he doesn't really have a lot of friends. He's very isolated, and he has a lot of time on his hands. So being a Nepo baby really does help his clout, but at the same time, he feels very lonely, even though he has a lot of social media followers. Nico, on the other hand, is very worried that Peter's head is getting too big because he's hanging out with Lonnie, and so she is sensing whether or not there's a problem. Because these inklings that are going on that Peter does not have much time for Nico, and Nico feels extremely left out. Lonnie has this big secret with the gangs right now. He tries to play it off, but he gets into trouble with his coaching during this time and missing classes and also missing football practice. So he's really going through the ringer right now, trying to figure out how to balance all of those responsibilities to try to protect his family, be at school, and also his new obligations with the 1/10th gang. We then get to see that Nico questions a lot about whether or not who's in the wrong during Civil War, Cap or Iron Man. And Peter looks up to Captain America as though he is the Messiah. It's very different from the 616, where Peter had a very direct relationship with Tony Stark. And so here it's more of an idolization of Captain America, and also Norman Osborn serves as the mentor to Peter in a lot of ways. The big fight that is in this episode is Spider-Man fights the Unicorn, as there was a jailbreak, and so there's a gang fight that happens. Lonnie saves Donovan from Mackay Gargan as the police comes. Then there's some tension between the Unicorn and her Russian gang friends, but there's a very significant scene where the Unicorn hits one of her associates, but Spider-Man blocks the beam, and so they get recaptured by police. So there's some really touching scenes that blurs the lines between the villain and hero. You don't know where one of them was going to go during this time. While this fight was happening, Nico was waiting outside the theater. Peter and Nico was going to share a movie together, but Harry then becomes a third wheel, and Nico becomes very uncomfortable as to why Harry is there, because Nico really thinks of Harry as being a faker and really have a lot of social media clout. Then why is he hanging with Peter and also with Nico? What is his angle overall? Episode 5 ends with Lonnie becoming Tombstone after he had saved Big Donovan from the Unicorn. Lonnie then has a bigger role within the gang and earns the respect of all the other gang members, because at first it wasn't that way. He was nicknamed Superstar and he was getting a lot of bad attention, but now he's a part of the gang and he gets a new name, Tombstone. So that is how episode 5 ended, and we'll see what happens next week, as Marvel will drop episodes 6, 7, and 8 next week. We'll get to see how the storyline moves along with Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. What do you think about these 3 episodes that dropped today? You can comment down below, like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. And we will see you next video. All right. Take care, everybody.